Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Again, everyone online, we know everyone, but we have some new folks here in our meeting in person today. And one welcome, if you want to come up closer or whatever you want to be is fine, but we'll have, anyway, just a quick little bit of an agenda for today. We'll begin with some introductions. And so for that, we'll ask folks to share a little bit about what's either brought them to this work or what they're interested in as it relates to military law work. After that, then, we're going to move into some brainstorming about the issues posed by Trump's and Hegzeth's imperial and fascist policies. If David Gespass gets here in time, then he's going to lead that discussion. If not, then I'll get us started and we'll see where it goes. We'll then discuss, really, for the MLTF, what should we be doing in response? And then from there, we'll have a report on our last year of work with suggestions for the future work, and that'll be done by Jeff Lake, our president. And finally, at the end, we'll have some time for discussion of what the MLTF could be doing better. And this is where we really are welcoming critique, suggestions, etc. So anyway, let's get started. And by the way, just so everyone knows, we have about 5 people online and about that same number here in person here at the convention. So I do have everyone in the room can see the folks on Zoom, so we'll do the best we can as a hybrid kind of thing. But I'll start the introductions, and then let's go through the room, and then we'll do the online folks. So,
okay.
My name is James Branham. I got involved with the MLTF. Really, that's what brought me to the Guild, to be honest, was the main thing, and has been the focus of my legal work has mostly been military law ever since. I think I got involved in 2004, I believe. And done a lot of different things in the task force. Just very proud to be here today, and Guild conventions are always a good thing. Gives you some energy for the fight ahead. So, Libby.
Libby from Chicago. I do a lot of counter recruitment work, and so I'm considered a legal worker, and that's how I got into the National Lawyers Guild. I'm also the treasurer right now.
Thank you, Libby.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Kabitas from the NLG in Massachusetts. I'm relatively new to the Guild, so just learning, absorbing what's going on. And yeah, as far as the military, as far as this task force is concerned, I'm interested to learn more about what the Trump administration is doing to the, how they're, I'm not sure how to explain it, but like what the culture they're creating inside the military at the moment and what we might be able to do about it.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Johnson. I'm an immigration attorney in New York. I don't have any direct exposure to the topic necessarily. The first sort of organizing that I ever did was as a junior and senior in high school in 2004 and 2005 doing counter recruitment work, and so I have an interest through that lens, and then also being fascinated by some of the discussions that occur so far on this topic, and so I've wondered how to support the task force's efforts.
Well, and one thing I'll mention as an immigration attorney, we often are actually needing immigration lawyers for our military clients to speak to, who often either just have their legal permanent resident status or have gained their citizenship by naturalization, but during that first term of enlistment, they're still vulnerable to losing it. And so, anyway, I definitely want to get your contact info afterwards, because we often are needing folks to refer.
Mark Stern, I'm from Boston. I haven't really done any military law work, but I would certainly be willing to help out if somebody refused an unlawful order, and I would have the time and skill to do it. I did try a Black Lives Matter case where the person refused an unlawful order.
Mm-hmm.
At least I claimed it was unlawful, and got some not guilty verdicts for that one. Mostly I do work around international law, and particularly interested in China and the buildup of military bases around.
Thank you. So for our online attendees, let's start with Jeff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Lake. I'm chair of the Military Law Task Force. I'm in private practice in San Jose, California. doing a variety of things, including some military law. So welcome, everybody.
Chris, would you introduce yourself?
Jeff,
I'm Chris Lombardi, and I'm a writer mostly, and I invited to the task force because I've been working on these issues for a million years, and and I'm curious about a friend from Massachusetts and the connection with Ian Austin, and I've been trying to write about all the veterans who've been involved in the anti-ICE stuff, and it was in Minneapolis. So that's what it is. That's who I am.
Thank you. Jane.
Hi, sorry. I'm Jane Kaplan, and I'm a member of the steering committee. I'm also an organizer of the Bay Area Military Law Panel, so we're trying to train more people to take on military cases.
Kathleen.
Oh, me? Kathy Gilbert. I'm in San Diego, and I'm a legal worker. In military law stuff, I do mostly discharges, complaints, complaint procedures, and discharge upgrades. And somehow I am the executive director of the Military Law Task Force, which mostly seems to mean that I bully other people in the task force into doing work.
And she is very effective at that. I can testify. Anna Maria.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am a member of the task force. I could say perhaps a bully-e. I yeah, happily so. Yeah, it always comes with hugs. So, no, so I'm a military spouse. I'm currently at Camp Humphreys, south of Seoul in Korea. My day job is to direct the discharge upgrade program at the Veterans Consortium. So consortium's out of DC, if you may not know. But you know, military issues very personal to me as a family member and spouse. And my clients, have a special place in my heart. All folks living with the after effects of trauma, folks with mental health conditions. And so I think Kathy and I initially bonded over discharge upgrades, but the task force does a lot more. So happy to be here. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you. Aaron.
You're muted there.
I'm Aaron Frischberg. I'm a solo practitioner in New York. I'm the vice chair of the Military Law Task Force and a member of the steering committee. And I do occasional military cases when they come my way. And most of the time that means calling Kathy and asking for what advice I can get on how to proceed. And I've done some work on keeping our guide for members of the military dealing with equal employment opportunity, military equal employment opportunity cases up our have our guide be up to date.
Jack. I think I'm on the chair. Thank you, Aaron. Matthew.
Hi, I'm a member of the steering committee and also the Bay Area Military Law Panel. I have a niche specialty that I've been doing for about, 15 years, which is helping 17-year-old kids who enlisted and realized they made a terrible mistake. I help those kids get out of their enlistment contracts.
And then Edward.
Hi, I'm Edward Hasbrook. I'm a legal worker in San Francisco. I got involved with the task force as a anti-draft organizer and pro se defendant when I was prosecuted for knowing and willful refusal to register with the Selective Service System back in the early 1980s. And a major focus of my work since then has been on selective service issues, which have been somewhat in the background, although they have exploded on to the front pages in the last few days, as some of you may know, as mainstream press has picked up on a story that we and the task force have been covering and involved in for months, which I'll talk about later when we get to the selective service subcommittee. But happy to be here and happy to see some old and new faces.
Dan.
Hi, sorry I kicked myself off there, but thank you for letting me back in. I'm Dan Mayfield. I've been in the Guild since 1974. I was a conscientious objector during the war in Vietnam, and then came to the Guild, still with my CO status being an important part of my life. And so when I found out about the Military Law Task Force, I got involved and have been since law school. So.
Well, I think that's all of our online folks. We do have some more people come in the room in person. Would any of y'all like to introduce yourselves, just share a little bit about what's drawn you to military law work, or what you're interested in?
Alabama, and I began this work in Japan in 1973 at the military law project there, the Guild Military Project there. And I've been a member of the task force ever since, as far as I know. That's all. I'm not interested.
David?
Yeah. David Gaspass. I also worked in the military law office in Japan, 73 and 74, where Kathy and I got married. And we came back because we founded the Military Law Task Force, and I remain a member because Kathy Gilbert keeps fetching at me to do something here and there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Excellent.
Art Eicher, also Milwaukee. I've never really done any military law cases per se. I have been involved at one point in representing harassed Vietnam veteran African Americans after they came back, went into the workforce, including being on Oprah Winfrey's show for that. And I've been active in Veterans for Peace, part of that affinity.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Mariam Abdi. I'm based in Chicago. I also do discharge upgrades and character of discharge for veterans, primarily Black and Brown South and West Siders in Chicago, but also around the Midwest. And so I'm excited to be here and to get involved.
Excellent. Well, on our agenda, since we have our introductions done, the next thing we're going to be doing is a conversation. Let me pull up our agenda just so I can look at how we framed it on the agenda, because we're going to be brainstorming about the issues posed by Trump and Hexit's imperial and fascist policies, and then discuss a little bit of what the MLTF should do in response to that. And I think, David, you're going to be leading that discussion, is my understanding. Or at least kicking it off.
I would say leading is probably too strong a thing. Kathy has me to sort of...
Can David speak up a little?
Yeah, Kathy, some thoughts about it. I don't think it's news to anybody.
Oh, that's right. We can
Get on camera.
You're fine. You can be right there. It's fine.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's a camera. That's not a mic. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's news to anybody what's going on. There is this myth that in Vietnam, the war opposition to the Vietnam War among military personnel was caused, at least in part, by the draft. And the truth is that there were large numbers of members who had volunteered for service, who also were part of the opposition. And the fact that we now have supposedly all volunteer military.
I think that changed last week, didn't it?
Oh, well, no, they're still registering for draft. I really question whether there's ever going to be a draft. I think that the technology is such that it takes too long to train people to do the work, to actually, that's just my guess. But my point is that as we see the administration becoming more and more extreme and flouting even basic international norms and laws, the potential for resistance within the military grows. And that, again, people join. When we were in Japan, the three main reasons that people joined were, I needed a job, I wanted GI Bill benefits, which don't really exist much anymore, or the judge told me I could join the Marines and spend 5 years in prison. The principal one now, with relatively few exceptions, Hegseth maybe being one, is that people join because that's the best job they can find. And, they have health benefits, which they need if they get shot up. But my point is that I think there's real potential now for inculcating resistance, and it is important. It is a time in which the MLTF may have a more significant role, to assist resistors, and resistance now can mean refusing illegal orders, but also to promulgate the idea that they can do that. And so I think we're reaching something of an inflection point where we are either going to have resistance inside and outside the military, or we're going down a very dangerous road from which there will be no return.
Okay. Could I respond to that?
Sure.
Okay. I was active with the anti-war movement in the military during the Vietnam War, as well as being active now. And I want to agree with some of what David just said, but perhaps put a little fine tuning on it. He is correct, in my opinion, that a lot of the GI resistance to the war in Vietnam was among those who enlisted, not necessarily limited to those who were drafted. And yes, when you list the reasons why people joined during the Vietnam War, the third one, which was the judge said, enlist in the branch of your choice or go to jail for 5 years, that was certainly a motivator. However, there is another distinction that I think is really important to separate that experience from the current one. If you were drafted during the Vietnam War, you truly only served 2 years. You went to basic training, you went to AIT, you shipped out to Nam, you did your one tour of duty in Vietnam, you came back, and a few months later, you were discharged. However, if you enlisted during that period of time, you did that same sequence, but you came back to the States and you had a year and a half to remain in the military. And having worked extensively during that time at Fort Lewis, I can tell you that there were active duty service members working against the war because they had seen how terrible the war was. They were back in the States, but they were still in the military, as opposed to draftees who got sent home. These guys had an extra year of active duty service. And during that year, a lot of them were incredibly active in the anti war movement. That is not the way things work now. Now, what we've seen is you enlist technically for 4 years, 8 if you count the reserves, but there's no draft to compare it to. So why are resistors now developing among enlistees? What I'm seeing is, again, here I'm agreeing with David. A lot of the 17-year-old kids that I work with currently are motivated to enlist for economic reasons. They think they're going to get job training. Surprisingly, almost all of the kids I work with are from small towns where there aren't many job opportunities. So I think the key thing now is that what resonates is this is not what I signed up for. A lot of them did not expect to be involved in warfare, particularly National Guard members did not expect in any way to be deployed stateside for crowd control or participation in mass deportation. And none of them who enlist in the National Guard expect to go to war. And yet we're finding that probably half of the casualties in the current war against Iran are actually National Guard members who were activated because they're also enlisted in the Army Reserves. So I just want to make those distinctions clear, at least from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Edward, you have your hand up.
Yeah, agreeing, I think, with much of what Matt and David have said, I want to throw out two seemingly kind of opposite perspectives to inform our work, trying to draw this back to what do we actually do. One is that while it's, interesting and useful to speculate about what people's motives are, or what kind of political views we might like to see them putting forth, I think it's important to remember, as a bunch looking around this Zoom and the room, as a bunch of old people and as legal workers trying to work with young people and non-lawyers, it's important to recognize our position of power and privilege, and that what we are trying to do is to serve as allies to a group of profoundly, especially for those in the military, disempowered people. And as allies, our role, I think, should be to amplify their voices and their motives, which may turn out to be, in interesting ways that we can learn from, different from what ours and past generations or the views of people in power have been. There have been too many stories in the past in military and draft law of lawyers who took over the case and steered it in the direction they wanted to do and not listen to their clients and put their clients first. So let's make this a client first kind of perspective in our practice. But the other side of that is that I think it would be sort of the other side maybe, is that I think it would be a mistake to focus too much or to frame our work, particularly in the question of why those who aren't already involved in it from within the guild or the broader community of legal workers might want to get involved in this work. we are not just doing this to defend some vulnerable population of people in the military subject to military orders or potential draftees against the ravages of the military system, although that is part of what we're doing. But we're also here to support them in the work that they are doing to prevent wars and to impair and undermine illegal war making today. And I think, it's not just, and particularly with respect to the draft, the question isn't just, is there going to be a draft? The preparations for a draft are important even when a draft isn't activated, because the perception that a draft is available as a fallback plays a key role in military planning and in enabling military overcommitment on the explicit, if you listen to the war makers and planners, assumption that, well, it doesn't matter whether enough people will fight or volunteer, because if that happens, or if this escalates out of hand and blows up in our face, well, we can always turn to the selective service system and activate a draft. So taking the draft off the table as a policy option, whether by mass direct action by potential draftees or through whatever legal interventions we might manage, is not just preventing a draft, but wielding our work to help prevent war. And I think that's really what I would hope would motivate people to get involved in this.
Thank you, Edward. In the room we have we'll start with Art, and then Sandra.
First, people much younger than me, so I just want to let the people know online that we are more than one generation. I am interested in the fact that I hear on TV that the Department of War is protected by divine providence, and to what degree the sectarian, pseudo-Christian adoption and promulgation can be challenged, or to what degree it can be used, or perhaps generates some lack of unity among the military. How do we approach that?
For the folks online who they're not really hearing our questions, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of restate briefly what she said. Art mentioned his concern about the growing religious bent of the Department of War under Pete Hegseth, and the growing use of weaponized religiosity in support of U.S. imperial ambitions. And I'll just add on that I strongly agree that has to be a priority. I feel like that this is, and I would say for two reasons. One, of course, is just that weaponized religiosity often has around the world has served to create some of the worst war crimes and atrocities, number one. But secondly, again, I keep coming back to the perspective of saying members of the military are an oppressed community, often isolated in ways from the broader community. When they do not have access to religious programming that's of their desire, not what someone else is telling them, that's a real problem. When they are cut off from those resources. And what Hegseth is doing, he's not only pushing a certain kind of Christianity, but he's also taking away access to minority traditions. One of the things he's doing, he's cutting down the number of religious affiliation codes. And what they put on your dog tag, from around 200 codes to about 30 codes. And he's claiming that only 80% of troops use these 30 codes. Well, that still means that 18% are not. He's actively trying to, what I would argue would be unconstitutional from an establishment clause standpoint, take sides in the case of religion. So I think both for the broader societal issues, but also the individuals involved, I think it's a really critical fight. Sandra?
People who are going into the draft, resisting the draft, they knew that what it meant to be a soldier was you would be walking around in wet jungle with a rifle on your back, and you would be actually aiming at real people. And I'm thinking now, when we're in an age of drones and a total ability
So so Sandra mentioned the fact that in previous generations, often those being drafted were being sent straight to combat missions, were being sent straight to those kind of scenarios. And while today many service members, not in a draft context, but those who are serving, may be doing things such as piloting drones, being more separated from the conflict. I would argue in some ways, one of the biggest issues is, if you look at who tends to get PTSD these days, it's actually the drone pilots who have the highest rate of it. And it tracks very consistently because before the drones were an issue, the group that I saw having PTSD the worst were radio operators. The reason being is that radio operators were often, I had several clients tell me almost identical stories, that they were staffing a radio at a certain location. They were hearing the reports from other places. They were hearing their buddies be killed, calling for help. They could do nothing. All they could do was relay messages. And it's that helplessness in that moment that was so destabilizing. And honestly, I saw, at least what I saw anecdotally, was some of the radio operators had far worse PTSD than the people in the actual fight. Because those in the firefight, at least they had the sense of, I'm getting to pull the trigger. I'm fighting the enemy. I'm trying to save my buddies, while the person on the radio can't. In the same way, the drone operators, that level of abstraction and that level, and they've designed this whole system in such a way to try to isolate the human element, to eliminate the human element. I'll also mention, I remember 20-some years ago, my very first MLTF event I went to, I heard Luke and Marty Heikens speak, and they talked about the potential and future of robotic warfare. And I remember thinking, wow, you guys are bonkers. And now, that is the reality we are facing. That what seems like fantastic science fiction today is not. And so that's a whole, so I think what it means for organizing is we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to find out, for instance, how do you organize drone pilots who might be sitting on a base in Missouri piloting drones on the other side of the world? How do you reach out to those folks? We have some work to do that. Online, Kathy has her hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to mention a few other dynamics of service members in this period that we need to be thinking about. And drone pilots are a component of that. But if we look at the military strikes and quasi-wars and the Iran war, one of the things we're seeing is that they are leery about using ground troops who have been the most rebellious traditionally, and have used special forces who are among the most indoctrinated and stereotypically macho of military personnel. And bombing, which means pilots, not just drone pilots, but Air Force pilots. So we're seeing right now that the military is using people who may be in the most difficult position to fight back, either because of a lot of indoctrination or because of very specialized skills and specialized backgrounds. But you can't keep doing that forever, and ground troops are a reality. So I think this is an important thing for the moment, but not the be-all and end-all of modern warfare. The other thing that I sort of see going on within the military is that there is a great deal of social isolation. Despite this idea of camaraderie and being there for your buddy and so on, people tend to be very isolated, tend to have relationships online more than in person. And that makes organizing different than it has been historically, and I think a little harder. People may speak out in private forums, but it's not the same social speaking out that some of us are used to. At the same time, people in the military have been, and this really, forgive me, I get really angry. We are losing reforms and wins that service members gained over the last number of decades around anti-racism work, around sexual discrimination, around lesbian and gay rights and now trans rights, around the sense that one can speak out at all. For folks in the military, it is difficult to feel like you can win when you see so many small victories being defeated by the Department of Defense and the administration. And I think we need to make sure that to the extent we can, that we help to protect those victories and support the people who continue to challenge in those. So I'm sorry, that's something that really angers me because my clients did a lot of those things. And to see them taken away is really painful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy, for sharing that. We have from the room.
I think that one of the most concerning things that happened really recently that personal firearms are now and when we have an extraordinary amount of violence, including sexual abuse and murder happening across the country on bases, now putting personal weapons into the hands of perpetrators effectively, I anticipate we're going to see a lot more really bad violence occurring on the bases themselves across the country. And I'm just wondering, like, is there something that we should be doing in terms of, one, publicize? I don't think the general population is aware of how much violence already occurs on these bases, or the incredible disappearances of women, or the drug trafficking, and all of the different things that already occur on these bases. But now, what the implications could be for the safety of people who are living.
So for those watching online, I'm just going to repeat the comment, and that was asked, how much awareness there has been about the recent change by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to basically open the doors for the private carry of firearms on military bases. I will say, from looking into that a little bit, it largely has loosened the rules a little bit. There already was some allowance for service members to bring their guns onto base already. It's just you had to jump through. Basically, Hegseth has taken away a few of the hoops. And the problem, of course, is as our person here mentioned, is that there is a tremendous rates of domestic violence on base, tremendous rates of also workplace violence more generally. And what can we do to organize around this? What can we do to educate the public about this? Because I think there's a lot of folks who really would be surprised to hear this is happening. I will say it was in the media, but I don't know how much is being talked about. Well, looking at our time, I think we need to shift gears a little bit and move into the next part of our meeting, reporting a little bit on the work of the MLTF in this last year. And then after that, we'll have some more conversation time. So, Jeff Lake, were you going to lead that part?
Yes, especially for the new folks. Welcome. The task force has been busy, as you might imagine, with all of the deployments domestically and internationally. We have a number of areas of our work, but we really were organized to support resistors. And so that's kind of our focus. And we get materials out there in a number of different ways. Last year, for instance, we developed a frequently asked questions piece on illegal orders, which has been very popular. We do work through committees. The Publications Committee, as you might imagine, publishes a number of different items. One is On Watch, which is a quarterly newsletter that we do, and we're always looking for authors on issues of military law and policy. And we have a number of legal memos and self-help guides that need updating or need to be created. So if you want to get in and plug in, we can get you writing right away. Another committee that we have is what Kathy was talking about, Military Justice Committee, working on issues of protecting the gains that we're losing on all fronts in terms of racial discrimination, sexual assault and harassment, and treatment of women in the military, issues related to LGBT, and all of those. So if you want to get involved in that work, join that committee. And then we have a committee that works with the International Committee, a joint working anti-militarism working group that we meet and try and educate the Guild about issues of militarism. Recently, there was the No Bases campaign, which was organized nationally about U.S. bases around the world and trying to raise awareness about that, the group was involved with, and the group is also developing materials on that issue. Edward, do you want to talk about selective service?
Sure. This is actually, selective service has been a back burner issue for most people for, well, decades. There's been a longstanding stalemate where draft registration had failed, enforcement had been abandoned, that had more or less made it unfeasible to try to activate a draft, and there wasn't much more pressure for that anyway. So people were just going about their business ignoring it for the most part. We are seeing this year, and I say this particularly again to any of those of you who may be tempted to get involved, we are seeing the most significant change in the Military Selective Service Act in almost 50 years. In response to the failure of the system under which young men are supposed to register themselves with the Selective Service system, but don't, and are even supposed to report to the Selective Service within 10 days every time they move until they turn 26. Does anybody even know that they're supposed to do that? No. That isn't working. That has led to a growing recognition, bipartisan, even by people who might support a draft, but who realize it's just not a realistic option, to abolish the Selective Service system. We've been part of efforts to draft legislation that's been introduced over the last 7 years, I guess, in Congress repeatedly. But in response to the threat of having their jobs abolished, the Selective Service managed to save their asses by getting Congress to enact a provision in the NDAA last year, which will end the current requirement for young men to register, but as of December of this year, will authorize the Selective Service system to require all other federal agencies to turn over any information they have that might identify or locate potential draftees, and will mandate that the Selective Service attempt to register them all automatically. A magic word, but the Selective Service doesn't have a magic wand. You may have seen the stories over the last couple of days. Most of the details have been left as usual to be worked out in regulations that would specify what data is sucked in, how it's used, various other aspects of it, because this is primarily a data matching project, and a very large one. There's a bunch of notices and approvals required under the Privacy Act and the Computer Matching Act. All of this has to be accomplished by December, when this is supposed to go into effect. And on March 30th, the Selective Service System finished their internal drafting of the proposed regulations and sent them over to the White House for White House review, which normally takes a few weeks. So we expect that there will be proposed regulations for an entirely new system of so-called automatic draft registration in the Federal Register in, my best guess is, 1 to 2 months, with a narrow 30-day comment period for us to review and respond. We've already seen proposals to greatly expand, even before this takes effect, sharing of the existing Selective Service registration list with immigration enforcement. The Guild task force led the filing on behalf of a broad coalition of peace groups, religious groups, civil liberties groups, of comments objecting to that. We'll be working on other regulatory comments this year. So there's a lot of work. You may conceptualize our selective service work as it would be in time of draft, as defending individuals who are threatened with being drafted. And we are working on that, and James in particular has been already organizing training sessions for would-be draft counselors in the event that we don't succeed in getting the Selective Service Act repealed, and we do move forward in that direction. But there's a lot of this sort of legal policy work, and that's really the crux of our work this year, along with lobbying and providing legal support to a broad coalition of groups, religious groups, feminists, anti-war groups, most of whom don't have the legal expertise that we do, in working this year with Congress to get the Selective Service Act repealed. That was, I would have said, a week ago that was a long shot, but now that a national debate about the propriety of stepping up preparations for the draft in the midst of this war and military overreach, I think we may really have changed the landscape in Congress. And I think for all the worst reasons, I think we may actually have a chance to push over the finish line the victory over the draft that mass quiet non-compliance by young people has largely won for the last 45 plus years. So we are, I think, this is the key task for us of allyship to young people. They've done the heavy lifting with taking the risk of non-compliance. It's for us to move that forward, to get that taken off the table as a policy option. So lots of work ahead this year in particular in relation to this situation with the changes in selective service going on in the midst of a military mobilization.
All right, so the bottom line, we need work on all fronts. And this is the theme this afternoon. So join the task force if you haven't. We can plug you in. If you want to represent people who are resisting, we can show you how to do that. If you want to represent people who are trying to get out, we can show you how to do that. If you want to write, we can do that. If you want to agitate, we can do that. If you want to educate the Guild on issues of militarism, we can we can plug you into that. If you want to work on issues related to selective service and counter recruitment, we can plug you into that. So please join us. Our website is nlgmltf.org. All the resources are there. You can contact Kathy Gilbert, our executive director, and she can plug you into the work. Our committee meet roughly every month by Zoom, so it's very easy to join the meeting and get going. So thanks everyone for coming this afternoon.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, my thought for our final minutes together, and I think it would be okay if we end a little bit early, but I would like to ask, for those of you who are new, I'd love to know what brought you here, or how did you learn about us? But also for anyone, our current members, past members, people who aren't members at all yet. Also, are there things that you see we could be doing better? Like what are areas of work that we need to grow in, or that things that we can be more effective in? So I want to open up that for a few minutes, if any thoughts folks have. Yeah.
happening earlier on that weren't getting publicized at all. So people who had family members who were working on the base who were civilians were getting rounded up in these ice rinks and it wasn't being publicized. So I thought that was just a very egregious do that to what to people who are related to our service members who are part of our community, who are serving our service members. So there's a lot of things in my community that don't affect the military law.
Thank you. For our online folks, we had someone here who spoke about her own personal familial connections to the military, to the issues of justice within the military, and how that often we all have these complicated relationships with these institutions and people we care about who are stuck in them in various ways. So thank you.
And living in a military community, San Diego.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a whole other world, living in a military community. I've done that a few times in my life, and it was challenging, to say the least. I had to move eventually. What other comments do folks have?
On the military community front, I will say I have a similar background with family members. My dad retired from the Army in July last year, so my immediate family has been living on and in vicinity to military bases for the past almost 20 years. And I will say right now I'm actually spending a lot of time close to Fort Cavazos in Texas, and there's growing dissent amongst the military community who are not rejecting their service as much as rejecting the trajectory of the current administration and the impact that policy is having on military families and military communities in terms of social services, support for veterans, what's happening to pension funds, things like this. So I think that there's a lot of rights ground, even outside of the specific war resistance that can start to kind of foment more dissent and connect these issues together in a way that really allows people to wake up more to how this all operates. I think when you're inside of this mechanism, it's really hard to see the forest for the trees in a lot of ways. And I do think that for members of the NLG that are living in these communities, that there's a lot of right ground right now to foment more dissent in new ways.
Absolutely. So I'll share for our online folks, just summarize what was said. We had someone share about the experience of being in a military community, and again, all the intersectional issues that arise, and how that in many military, and particularly was speaking about Fort Cavazos in Texas, how that there is growing frustration in the ranks, growing frustration by military families. And these are people who aren't going to be anti-war anytime in the near future, but these are people who are saying, I'm being treated unfairly, and I don't like it. And that is a great starting place. We saw that during Vietnam, that a lot of what became more politicized objection began with just frustration about basics of life that you're counting on, that you think when you join the military you're taken care of, and then you find out, no, you're really not. Basic equipment often isn't appropriately provided, things like that. And so I strongly agree. And I think with MLTF, we've always been in this delicate situation because we want to be relevant to all the communities we want to reach out to, that we want to be effective in doing outreach to, and still be true to our values. And so that sometimes it's tricky, but I would say as a general rule, we have often worked hard on issues of injustice within the military that are not necessarily politically driven, because those issues of injustice touch on other things. And it often is one thing connects to another thing. And sometimes when folks realize, hey, I'm being screwed over on my educational funding, then it might be, well, what else are they screwing me over on? And what about the mission? Why am I even it's you ask one question, it leads to a whole bunch of other questions. So, at least from my understanding how the MLTF we function, we've tried to stay in the conversation and stay in the conversation with people which we may not 100% agree with, but if we have 80% agreement, I bet we can do something with this person. It's a starting point. And so we begin where they're at. And we also don't go into it assuming we have all the answers either. I often tell people when I deal with the military is like I'm a visitor. I'm a foreigner. I'm not part of this culture. I know about it a little bit, but I'm not an insider. And so approaching it from that level of respect, often I have seen it pay off in dealing with clients, actually. When I treat them like the subject matter experts of their own lives, then it often breaks down some issues of trust also because they haven't had people listen to them. And so when we listen to them, try to understand where they're coming from, even if we might not agree with all their assumptions about the world, often it leads to some good things. All right.
I'm wondering to what degree any of our people do or could have relationships with veterans groups. You mentioned veterans groups. The AFL-CIO in Milwaukee has the veterans communities that sometimes when there's been attacks on the VA, we've had kind of a common front. So I'm just wondering about that.
So Art mentioned the idea of partnering with veterans groups, and not just explicitly anti-war veterans groups like Veterans for Peace or About Face, but also other kinds when we have issues of common concern. And I strongly suggest that that is a good strategy, that there are times when we can find common ground with folks that, and again, I don't think we should ever sell short our values but at the same time, well, I'll give you a great example of this. During the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era, there were some in the LGBTQ equality advocacy world who were actually critical of us advocating for the rights of LGBT people in the military. And they said, well, you shouldn't be helping people to be in the military because it's an oppressive institution. And well, we understand that perspective. At the same time, there's no doubt that in our society, participation in the military does open some social doors. It does open economic doors. And so by telling people that in other words, by advocating for queer service members, it was an issue of justice. Even though at the end of the day, would we want anyone to join the military? No. Doesn't matter what your orientation or identity is. We don't want you to join. But at the same time, if you do join, we want you to be treated fairly. And so I think there is areas that we can work together across those lines. I do think, though, for me at least, it's important also to be very clear where we're coming from. And so when folks work with, and sometimes that happens, the groups say, I don't want to work with you. That's fine. But often if we approach them from points of common ground, a lot more collaboration. And I think especially working with veterans caucuses and labor organizations or other organizations we're part of can be a very effective strategy, particularly when, again, a labor organization, you're theoretically or having a more progressive orientation. We might have common ground there. And I'm thinking about veterans caucuses. And again, for anyone here or online who is a veteran themselves, being in those spaces as a veteran and expressing yourselves can be a very good thing. Well, I think this is probably a good stopping point for us. I want to thank everyone so much for coming out today. I'm really excited to have somebody turn out. If you're not on our mailing list yet, Libby, do you have some we could write down email addresses? So if you could give us at least your email address, that's the best way to stay in touch with us. A couple of last things I'll mention is, of course, our website has a lot of good stuff on it. But we also have a very active listserv, and we have one of our members, Chris Lombardi, post really almost anything of relevance on military law issues in the media shows up on our listserv. And so that alone is well worth the price of becoming a member of the MLTF. So
I'll mention what I said at the beginning of the meeting. The last newsletter was fantastic. You should grab a copy off the table or online.
Thank you. Well, bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for the comments and questions.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Another thing well done. You're really